action. I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try, and I try.
Hello and welcome to Call to Action, the go-to podcast for anyone trying to make sense of the world of marketing, advertising and beyond. In an industry that is a minefield of utter bollocks, we aim to capture our heroes and allies from the front line to have a chinwag with. It's like Pokemon Go, with the single but vital exception that it's not a short-term bandwagon of shite. It's brought to you by Gasp, and I'm Giles Edwards, co-founder and MD. Today I've caught Andrew Spurrier-Dawes, a Welsh IronMan better known by his initials that sound like a mashup between a hallucinogenic drug and a behavioural disorder. ASD is currently a global digital director at MediaCom, where he has worked on brands including Mars Food, Sky and Tesco. He also co-hosts two successful podcasts, Connected, where he talks to the greatest names in marketing, technology and beyond, and Echoes of Glory, a podcast dedicated to the brilliant Tottenham Hotspur. Andrew says, in the future we will need to separate the internet into three spaces: services, information and content. The beauty of this is that it will create areas of trust, curation and data. Welcome to the show, ASD.
Thank you very much. I've never been so complimented. I'm going back to my wedding, all my birthdays. I wish my wife was in the room.
Downhill from here.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Quick fire, Mac or PC?
PC, I've got more brain cells. I need more than one button.
IronMan or Welshman?
Welshman.
Lingdy Long or Popty Ping?
I mean, that is a very my initial answer is Popty Ping, but they're very pop. It's like Kutch. It's a bit Gavin and Stacey. It's pop Welsh, not deep Welsh.
Cliff Jones or Gareth Bale?
Cliff Jones.
The Young Ones or Bottom?
Young Ones.
The Scissor Sisters or the Blues Brothers?
Blues Brothers. What is that? What is that?
I don't know. There's no logic. Last one. Should I stay or should I go?
Oh, that's Pop Clash, and Clash is my favourite band. You should stay, mate. I love you very much.
Brilliant. So ASD. So how did it all start for you? So what was your first ever job, and then what was your first kind of proper marketing type gig?
First job was McDonald's. I had an interview. I went in a suit into McDonald's, and I had shoes on. I had my dad's suit. I went in, and really all I needed to do was prove I spoke English. Actually, the reason I was wearing a suit is because I had a funeral to go to straight after, and I got the job on the spot. So I was buzzing throughout the funeral. It was awful. But that is still one of the greatest jobs I've ever had. I absolutely loved that job. I've got so many stories from McDonald's, from missing out on an armed robbery by 30 seconds and you can look, that's Cardiff Gate. Hold up very quickly that I did the open, so I used to get there at 5:30, and I used to cycle there, so I used to get there a quarter of an hour early because I'm early for everything. The Russian army have gotten a saying that there's no such thing as on time, you're either early or you're late, and I've always believed in that, so I'm always early to my shifts. And my dad was awake at 5 a.m. for no reason. I've never seen him awake, so he said, I'll give you a lift. And so I was on time at 5:30. In that time, a guy with a sawn-off shotgun and an axe came to our McDonald's, and the two managers who were there opening, who got there a bit early, they tied them up on the floor. They hit one of them in the ear with the butt of the shotgun. He became an alcoholic. The other one, who got tied up, became a millionaire a few months later. So if you search Cardiff Gate millionaire, he's at £1.3 million, and he's back in McDonald's now. The newspaper article, when it said Luke and his wife, his Mrs. Emma, went on a shopping spree in Next. And I loved that. And that's why I loved it. It was just full of normal people. It was my people, which I struggle with. Then I also worked at Pizza Hut when I was in uni. I loved that job as well. One of my proudest professional achievements is I got working part-time. So I worked about 3 days a week while I was doing uni because I paid my own way. I rose to assistant store manager within 6 months. Bossed that. And then uni, I did go to graduation. I'm not very good with just tradition for the sake of tradition. Didn't bother. I looked on Milk Round, every job I could see in London, applied for it. for no reason other than that I knew I needed to be away from home. I loved home, but there's reasons we might get into why I needed to have that space. London seemed to be where it was at. And I failed a job interview for Sky Sports News to be a subtitler, and that was the world's worst job. So it's sitting there and I love Sky, with the news coming in on one ear, and you speak it into a mic, and then the program recognizes your voice and it spits out the subtitles. And you had to have an amazing spelling range, because when you're in the pub and you're seeing Sky Sports News and you see the words change as while they're on screen, that is because there's people there editing it as it goes out. So you've got to be multitasking, saying it and editing it. But they gave me a 50-word spelling test, and I mean, I grew up with spell checker, so why do I need to know how accommodation is spelled? I mean, serious. I know there's a double C and a double M now, but that's ridiculous. Failed that interview. Failed the job interview for a research company because they're idiots. And then I walked into Walker Media, and guy called Simon. I had 2 earrings at the time, and that is another story from McDonald's, but I'm not going to go into that. But it involves an orgy and avoiding an orgy. And I've got chat. I was really raw. Like really raw. I was an idiot back then. I didn't know how to dress, didn't know what smart casual was. Didn't really know. I didn't really know how to write an email, didn't know how to speak formally, didn't know how to address clients, all of that stuff. But I can hold information in my head. I can work things out. And I like to think there's a bit about me because I've worked hard at educating myself. And he took a chance on me, Simon Davis. And that was my first job in media, in Walker Media. And it was the best job ever, because Walker at that time was top 5, top 6 agency, but was small, independent and punchy. And there was always an interesting point about the revenue per head. We had more revenue per head, which doesn't mean I was paid more, quite the opposite probably, in fact, but it meant that we did more work because we had fewer people. So I just learned how to do everything. Like I look at when you're in bigger agencies and you've got departments who do this, departments who do that, trafficking and planning and buying. I did all of it. And it just gave me an incredible base. And it wasn't aggressive, but it was just you had to be able to stand on your own 2 feet there. And I think if you made it there, you can see a lot of people who could make it anywhere. And I loved Walker for it. I still feel very much aligned to that independent, sparky nature, and I loved it. I loved it.
Yeah, and you learned everything. What did you learn from? There was a director called Clive, I understand. He taught you not to be a cunt, or told you not to be a cunt.
Yeah, there was a girl joining the team. So we both started. So I felt I'm a very competitive person, to the point I'm very competitive with myself. I'm very just with everything, not in a bad way, just in my head. And I was making mistakes because I was an idiot back then. And they were bringing a girl to the team to sort of help with the workload, and I didn't see that as a compliment to make, I didn't really understand how I can work with people then. And I went off. I took him into a meeting room. I went off on him, and it was actually the first day of his new AD as well. So there was an AD who just started, and the first thing she saw, this is Vic Peckett, was me just going off on one, and I never lose it. You've never known me angry. I was like, why the fuck do I don't need her. Why am I? What's that? And he just listened to it, and then he said, Andrew, just don't be a cunt and get on with it. And it was great. And that's a sort of, I'm not so, I don't need, the say something nice then give the feedback, then say, I just need straight feedback. And I love that. And I'll love you more for it. And we got on like a house on fire. He was a great leader.
Yeah, it sounds quite nice, because you paint a picture as if you completely unloaded on him for some time, but actually he nipped it in the bud.
The problem was me. The problem is always me. The problem is always, I try and take, to quote Jocko, the extreme ownership. The problem is always me. I've got a problem with someone. It's because I'm not communicating effectively. I'm not doing the work properly. It's because I'm not understanding the brief properly. The problem was me. And it was both that my work wasn't good enough and that I didn't understand how to work and communicate with her properly. It's that simple.
Presumably you learned so much there. What happened there, and how did you end up at MediaCom?
So I went Walker, Zenith, Walker, MediaCom. I did that classic thing of, right, Billy Big Bollocks, 3 years in the industry. Excuse my language. I want to move. I want more money. I want a new position. And I looked around and I interviewed, and there were 3 interviews. There were 2 jobs that I got, but I didn't want. One with a guy called Matt Mint, who was at Mindshare to work on Land Rover, and one with a guy called Owen Wilson at MediaCom. Now that's important because I truly believe that you work for people, and the rest of it sort of falls into place, but you really do work for people. And I didn't like the jobs, but I always remembered those two people. I've never met Matt Mint since, but I've always remembered his name. And the other job was an international role at Zenith. No problem with Zenith. I hated working in international. I think when you're not as far up the ladder as I am now, so when you're account manager, is a lot of coordination, and I hate coordination because there's nothing I can really add to it. It's just spreadsheet management, and it's not my skill base. So I started looking for another job. I quit without a job to go to after 4 months, which it was decisive. It might have been a stupid thing to do, but then I looked, and Clive actually had brought together the TV and digital departments at Walker to create the screen department. I'd never learnt TV. I was digital. And so I said, look, I'll come back if you want. I'm not begging, but if there's a role there and I can come and take it. And so I went and learned TV. So I ran TV and digital, and I've got that extra string to my bow. And I had a big team, loved that. Then I had a disagreement with someone about something, and I'm quite proud at times, and I felt like I've been lied to. Whether it had been the case or not, it doesn't really matter anymore, and I've got full respect for everyone involved. But I felt like I was lied to, so I knew I needed to leave. But I needed to leave. It was very early into that period, and so I had a plan to leave from quite early within that employment. But I knew I needed to not have 2 lots of 6 months or a year on my CV after the Zenith and then Walk again. So I stuck it out, loved it again, but once I make my mind up, I had to do it. And then I spoke to a recruiter, and I said, look, I don't want to go to MEC because it's south of the river, and I live at North London, and I don't want to go to MediaCom because I don't want to be just one of the numbers. It's massive. How can I stand out there? Then the recruiter said, look, there's a guy called Owen Wilson who's got a job for you. They've just won eBay, so they need someone to not only onboard clients. I love onboarding clients, but they also need someone to see if they can teach the DR team to do brands, because they had separated the performance team and the brand team. And if they can, they'll integrate the performance team into the wider planning unit. And so I went and did that, and I did, and we did end up joining the bigger department, the Connect department, and I loved it, and I'm still here. I never thought I'd be here this long. I'm 6 years in. The reason I'm still here is I love the people here. There's so many brilliant, intelligent people. I mean, you've spoken to Murray, I know, and Murray is an absolutely fantastic man. Forget his unbelievable skills, strategic and knowledge and awareness. He's just a brilliant man, and there's so many of those people at MediaCom I could talk. And I'm not a company man. I'm not going to sacrifice my learning or my earning potential or whatever it is to just for the sake of loyalty. But MediaCom is the best place for me at the moment, and I love it.
And so you said you love onboarding clients. So I'd like to understand why that is. But equally, what does your role entail nowadays at MediaCom?
Okay, onboarding clients. I've done it. So I did it for Tesco. I've done it for a few clients. Tesco's a big one because they're starting again. There's a whole new normal that needs to be established, and there's so many things that you learn throughout the process. My thing is learning. I love learning. I love being wrong. I love finding out new things. And onboarding a client is, here's this completely new thing that you need to get up and running straight away. And there's not a lot of precedent for how you do that. It's not just an easy process of you go, there's this and there's then you do this. But there's so many different ways of doing things. They're used to certain ways. We may have certain processes, and you have to marry it all. Super stressful. But it's that thing, I'm not, when you bring teams together, if you want to bring a team together, don't have a pint with them. That's the worst thing for bringing a team together, because then it just sets a precedence that the only way you're nice together and you can bond is by sacrificing your personal time in the evening over an alcoholic drink. If there's people who don't drink or people who'd rather be at home with their kids, it's a stupid thing. But you put teams through hard times. That's where a bond comes in, and it's the same as a pitch. That's why you love going for a pitch. In the moment, you might not love it all the time, but actually, when you come to the end of it, my deepest relationships have been built on onboarding clients, the difficult briefs. So that's why I love onboarding clients. It's just the learning. My current job is great. I'm a global digital director. I lead Mars Foods and Mars Pet Care. Mars Pet Care is massive. So we're doing some really, really interesting projects. I can't obviously talk about too many of them, but we're doing industry leading stuff, and we'll publish our results soon. And again, I'm learning, and I love working with Russia and then working with China and working with the States and South America and Southeast Asia and Australia. My days are stretched, but you can't the data laws in Russia, you can't take data out of Russia, so I have to have a completely different data set up in Russia. But their TV is still super cheap, and they get significant reach. So the benefits that some people use of the efficiency of targeting on digital may be nullified by that. And then you go, China, that's crazy over there, and I love what's going on over there. But that's a super different thing, and how they're more mobile, and how they use QR codes and WeChat, and how they're more used to e-commerce, and how there's different behaviors expected. That's the bit of my job that I love. And so being in a more senior position, I don't have to do as much coordination, but the decisions that I come out with my markets have big implications for lots of people. And I love just learning and having to meet so many people. And it's the way I speak to Russians has to be very different to the way I speak to my Chinese team, to my UK team, to the States team. So again, I'm learning about people, learning about human truths. Every day is different, and I just quite enjoy it. But I also think it's a framing thing. I think you can make the most of most jobs as well. There's a lot of bits I hate, but they're the bits I learn the most from. So,
The cultural differences you just kind of alluded to, you wouldn't talk to one of your Chinese team members the same way you might do Russian. Have you had any disaster stories there?
Not really. I mean, you have to just check yourself, because the Chinese are very blunt, and what they say in emails they'll say to your face, and that's the way it is. It's not offensive, but then they're also very hierarchical as well. So they may not want to speak to me, they may want to speak to my boss, just because that's the way it is. And you just have to be wary, and it's more my reactions that I had. My disaster stories are always in my reactions, and then how I choose to act on that. I'm so much better at it than before, but occasionally you go, there's other markets like where they start the day off slowly, but then they'll work really, really late. And then you go, why can't they just be like me? Why can't everyone just be like me? Right? And so my disaster stories are all about my processes and my lack of, I guess, empathy or comm skills.
So you've worked global and local, and funnily enough, you mentioned earlier about Zenith international scene didn't necessarily appeal, but perhaps it was because until you reach high up the ladder, you get more significant role and opportunity to learn and to have a say. So do you have a preference with global and local and big and small clients?
It's not that I didn't like Zenith. I love Zenith. I love the people there. The job wasn't right for me. Maybe it was just the job within, maybe it wasn't even international. So the reason I've got this job is slightly skirting around the question is I was meant to move to China. I got the dream job, and I mean the dream job in our Chinese office. And we were all but moved. Like the contract to rent the house out was on my table. The DVD's gone. Books gone, CDs gone. Then we found out my wife was pregnant. We had real difficulties getting the first one, getting pregnant with the first one. So we weren't sure if the second one would ever happen. So I had to pull the move to China at the very last minute. And I can't tell you how last minute. I'd been out there multiple times. We were looking at flats. Like we'd been to look at flats in China, in Shanghai. And so I was left to stay at MediaCom. I was employed, but without a job. And so I had to look at roles. And this job came up on Mars, and it was brilliant. And I loved it. And so do I like global versus local? There's times where I wish I was local, because they're doing the planning, they're doing the activation, they're speaking directly to media owners and actually doing the work, whereas I'm sitting one layer above that, and I miss that. But then also I'm now the person having the conversations on how to do that as well. So it's pros and cons of both. Right now, for my life situation, this is working. I love global because the times and how I work with my family, it works better. And frankly, working from home is better when you work at global, because I don't need many face-to-face meetings because all my teams are around the world, but I miss local. And what was the other, big or small clients? So I've really loved my small clients because they rely on me more. Bigger clients tend to have a better idea or an idea of what they want to do, and you tend to just activate how you do that. Whereas smaller clients tend to need you more. But I think a better question or a different question is the glamorous clients or the non-glamorous clients. All my favorite clients have been the ones that no one really wants to work on. Like I've worked on a gambling client at a previous agency, and I love that one. One, I get to talk about sport all day, but like people, no one wanted to work on that business. And you go in, you make a difference. They're grateful. You're properly part of the team. They need you, and it's great. So I always say, go for the small. What's the client list you don't want to work on or no one wants to work on? Go and find them. Because if everyone wants to work on Nike, but Nike all the money goes into the creative, and then the media is fairly simple, right? And even if it's not, then there's loads of other people to do it. I had a friend who wanted to be an architect, and they were really excited, and they got into the actual business, and they realised it wasn't until 20 years when they were in there, before they actually be doing all the drawing, all the exciting building stuff. Actually, what they were doing is more of the process stuff. That's what it's like working on a big client, and when you're more senior, it's amazing. And I'm not criticising that, because you learning those processes and learning that marketing knowledge and learning how that business works is equally as valuable as the glory you get as this individual being needed on a smaller team. But I think there's a lot to be said for the less glamorous clients.
Yeah, I agree. Funny enough, there's a parallel there with something that Dave Trott said numerous times about your point about Nike, and it more comes down to that Nike doesn't really need me, doesn't really need anyone. But Dave's point tends to be, if you're a brand in trouble, you need me. Give me a call. He doesn't want to talk to the market leader. They don't need him. No,
and that's exactly it. Then you get to the reason is that it's not ego. It's more, what are my values? What do I believe in? And then you're constantly testing that. You're constantly going, why do I believe in that? Rather than I'm just doing someone else's beliefs with a little bit of a shine because of my input, but actually I'm just following the line.
I want to touch on digital, and I'm doing bunny ears here when I say digital. You kindly donated a brilliant isolated talk a few weeks ago, and you mentioned that the internet exists as a dangerous counter-cultural tool. What did you mean by that? Can you elaborate for anyone listening who hasn't seen your talk?
The digital thing is hard. I find my job from a moral point of view very difficult to justify. I was brought up to have a strong moral standpoint, and I do it. Obviously, there's grey areas and everything, but there is. It's easy to classify a lot of what's right and a lot of what's wrong. And my point on the internet is, to drive society forward, I believe that you need rub. You need two things that are rubbing together, because that's where the spark of creativity comes from. When you go on holiday to dead towns, it's full of the same types of people, right? There's no excitement, there's no spark. You go to places where people are bored, or who take loads of drugs, or where there's high levels of pregnancies, because everyone's the same, nothing changes. And so you need places where different people can be, and where they meet is where the spark of culture comes from. So I use the example of music. So, it's very easy to see in punk, where you've got a very right-wing government and then mass unemployment. So you've got a spark there of anger. You've got a spark there of people haven't got much money, but then they can create this angry music out of this garage band, which then challenges points of view. I use the example of first wave skinheads, because there's two waves of skinheads. Obviously, there's the early 60s skinheads, which weren't the racist type, the EDL type that we're seeing now. They were, they had your mods, your rockers, your skinheads. And what they did was they came out of London, where you had lots of West Indian immigrants, first generation West Indian immigrants, who were living in the same deprived areas of London as these white working class kids. And so they started to share the music. And so the fashion started to share, but also the beats and the rhythm started to share. And suddenly that became music, a music movement and a fashion movement, and then a point of view that a point of view on acceptance that we still see today. So there needs to be rub, but the internet doesn't allow that. The problem with the internet is, I think, multiple. Is on multiple levels. One, it's so easy to go and publish anything, right? I publish rubbish all the time, or whether it's a tweet, whether it's an article on LinkedIn, whether it's a podcast, right? I've got no training in how to do it. That's great. There's loads of grassroots people who are really good, but it means there's an enormous amount of guff. But it also means there's an enormous amount of guff. It's very difficult to stop people copying content. So it's very difficult to stop the barrage of content and find out what's true as well. And then I think it's also very difficult to have borderlines, whether it's geographic or whether it's class or wherever it is, where some people are and some people aren't. And I think that's needed, frankly. I think there's places where people can go and occupy and have an educated point of view. And, my ism, I'm very consciously classist, I think, at times. I find it very difficult. Anyway, I think we need to have places where people can be, and where there's curation, where there's editing, and where we know there's trusted sources. And that goes back. And then I had the idea of the three different types of the internet, and that we were talking about. There's services, which is your Internet of Things, which is your bank transfers, which is the functional under the ground internet that we don't see we don't interact with, or we do interact with, but we interact with the thing that is powered by the internet, then I think there needs to be a middle bit, which is basically what we would hope newspapers would be, where there's regulation, where it's regulated by industry and government bodies, where there's editing, where adverts are chosen, where they're not flooded with internet, what the dream of the internet is. And then there's a cowboy internet where you shove loads of tracking and you shove loads of ads in there, and you can get all of the rubbish into there, which is great for just being like lowbrow entertainment. We all need that sometimes. But when we're going for a place where we know there's truth and there's educated opinion, where we're looking to expand our echo chamber, that's where we're going. Not where an algorithm on a popular social media network or video network is just feeding us more of the same stuff or trying to enrage us to increase our engagement, to increase how many ads we see. Leave that to the place where we know there's lack of trust. Let's have a separate place where we can have trust and expand our vision. It's never going to happen because it's really hard to regulate all the people who are powering the internet. I mean, there's a few obvious players, and the way that they're entangled in government and way they entangle their services to make them very difficult to detangle means that we're in for a rough few years, I think.
You hit on something there with algorithms and that the echo chamber that exists. I think a starting point would be to have an algorithm that displays nobody who bought this has ever bought that.
Oh, that's interesting.
Just to add some randomness back in, because it is too much of an echo chamber.
So I've had two ideas on that. One, any company that uses an algorithm to select or even deselect media needs to be classified as a media company, not an engineering or a social company, because they are selecting and editing what people see. So they need to be held to regulatory guidelines or wherever it is, regulations. And the second one is there needs to be companies that come out and say, we will mess up your tracking and your algorithm. Just give us a few logins and we will flood that algorithm with random selections of things so that you are not being tracked, so your data is devalued, and so they have to rethink how they approach people, because we went from a place where there was valued content and there was a value exchange between the content and then being tracked, but now there's so much content that actually all the value that is being created is just purely in the data harvesting, just stealing data from us. Now I know that powers free services like email, like Google Maps, and I'm really not having a go at any particular company. It's just the way that people are being used and what they're being shown purely for the sake of growth and revenue isn't healthy for society. And that's the problem I'm trying to solve with the isolated talk about how we need to go back to culture, editing, and trust, which the internet doesn't cause. And I'll tell you what the challenge with that in my role is if there are so many platforms where there's so little trust, then how can we expect brands to have the same impact that they do on TV or elsewhere when people don't trust the medium, they don't trust the content either side of the ad, and they don't trust the ads that are next to it. There's a big thing to say. There's a big part of TV is the content that it's next to, and the minimum required quality of content for the majority of channels is high compared to the internet. The ads that you're next to makes a massive difference. And I think there's a massive signifier effect. And there is a signifier effect of people know that it costs a lot of money to go on TV or to out of home. So it really feels like they're spending money to get a good message out to you. Whereas you can spend 10p on the internet and get a message to people, and people know that. And so it reduces trust. And so that's something that we have to overcome. And so the equivalency of eyeballs across channels is something that people really need to take more of a focus on. I think MediaCom obviously do a great job with the econometrics and things like that, but I think it's something that we don't really talk about enough.
Yeah, you're right. And I think that signalling effect is also true. But when you look at broadcast versus targeting, I mean, if I have a message targeted just at me and only I've heard it, that's going to carry less trust than if someone's announced something to thousands of people. They've got skin in the game there. They've made a call to thousands of other people all saying the same thing. They've got a lot more to lose.
Yeah, it's great for DR, for telling me to buy a product that I may have been buying anyway. But if you ask people their favourite adverts, some nerds will have some digital ads. And there was an amazing 3M one in Russia where they asked you to go to the Post-it website, and then they bought billboards across the most popular websites in Russia. And then they retargeted you with a Post-it with your to-do list on it. Brilliant. Yeah. Obviously, you have to get the user to do something, but I love that. But the majority of people's favourite adverts are ones that they've been able to talk about their friends with, not some DCO one of a million ads that randomly puts together a call to action and an image to try and get half a second of viewability. That's not what we do. And let's start by making ads more expensive. I think that would be a good start.
It would certainly help. The reason we started Isolated Talks was to really help the Samaritans, and I'm not ashamed at all to say that I started to really feel kind of higher levels of anxiety than normal at the start of lockdown, and I felt these kind of feeling that I hadn't felt for a few years, albeit with my own history of issues with depression. How have you found lockdown? Because you're very open with your previous struggles with depression. Has it been testing?
Yes and no. So exactly a year and 11 days ago, we found out my mum phoned me on a Friday and said, don't panic, but I was driving, I couldn't use my left foot, and I dinged the car. I got taken to hospital, not because of the car, because of not being able to use the left foot. They found a tumour. A week later from that, they found 12 tumours in 12 different places, and they were all stage 4, level 3, or level 3, stage 4. So they were the worst they could be on both measures. And the cancer, the causal cancer, was esophageal. So it was just rising through her throat. And then for 6 months, I watched her die. Now, you pair that going back to the point on why we didn't go to China when we had the pregnancy, and the days were merging of when mum was going to die and when the baby was going to be born. So this was, and I was starting a new job. So they were all around the same time about a year ago. And it was a nightmare, frankly, because you go, well, as the weeks get closer, you go, well, what if my wife, my amazing wife, Emma, goes into labour on the day of the funeral? What do you prioritise? What do you do? I don't know the answer. And no one knows the answer. And everyone's just a bit, when you ask people, they're just a bit like, well, you can't know the answer. So we watched her slowly die. Like, we were watching, one of her favourite things was Queer Eye. So she used to come over to our house, but I've got 3 steps in front of my house and we had to stop by episode 4 because she didn't have the strength to climb, even with the two me and my dad to help her up. And then they put her in a hospital bed, and then we could still have a chat with her, but she couldn't go outside. And then she lied down and basically didn't get up again. And we went over the day before, on November 26th, we went over and she couldn't swallow because the cancer was doing all sorts to her throat, and she you could tell she could hear you, but she was choking on her own just spit, and couldn't open her eyes and was just fetal. Basically said goodbye, and then got home, and a few hours later Emma's contraction started and wanted a home birth. So from 10 till 3 we were in a pool trying to give birth. It wasn't working, so they blue lighted us to Lister, the amazing hospital in Stevenage, full of most amazing people. Had the baby at 6. Incredibly stressful. I hate feeling useless. I like to think I could, but there's nothing a man can do during birth apart from just try and be nice but not get in the way. Like, it's really difficult for men. Then so that was at 6. At 2 I got the call to say mum had gone. So that was a day. I'm not going to lie, that was a day I'll never forget. November the 27th. And so then I had a new baby. I had a 3-year-old. I had dad to deal with. Dad's disabled, and I haven't had normal for a long time. And so we had the funeral on the 13th of December. All the time I had my bereavement / parental leave, came back for a couple of weeks, and then COVID started. So I've been in therapy the whole time. And I'll tell you why I've been in therapy. I didn't cry at mum's funeral. I didn't feel sad. And that is the worst fucking feeling I've ever had. Is my mum was in an amazing wicker casket in front of me. People around me are bawling. My wife is in bits. My dad's in bits. My brother's in bits, and I'm there, not feeling. I wanted to go to therapy and go, why? I love my mum more than anything. She gave so much for me. Why couldn't I even be sad that she isn't with us? Wasn't able to see this girl. And I tell you, when I was 13, I went down, we had a crash. Dad had gone down to make tea for my mum, and he had a heart attack and he'd fallen face first into the oven, right? And he got brain damage that night. I remember going down, and as you go down the stairs, you could see the door. And I remember seeing a massive pool of blood, half the kitchen, with the glass from the kitchen. And there was just a hole where Dad's head had been on the floor where it was clean. And it's cracked on. But at that point, I was 13, and that was the point where I lost my childhood, and I suddenly had to step up, and I had to take responsibility. And that was a point where I started to bottle up my feelings. And I'm really good at bottling my feelings, to the point where it's unhealthy now, and I don't feel I don't feel like I feel really strong when things get really strong. I feel, but in the middle, I just don't feel things, which makes things like empathy really difficult because I'm not able to feel. If you're sad and crying to me now, Giles, I don't feel that, but I've become very good at observing that behaviour. But I didn't know how to deal with this, with all the pressure of not having a childhood. Like I can't remember anything from before I was 13, right? And so I used to self-harm. I never used to cut. I used to get a ruler and scrape my arm because it's easy to get. You can hide that far easier than a cut, and it doesn't leave scars. Yeah. And so I've dealt with depression, and actually hurting myself is a very good way to make me feel because I can translate my mental pain into physical pain, and that's where the IronMan came in. I signed up to I did the 100k run and the IronMan, and I did the IronMan with a broken foot. And I had a hernia, and I just made it through because pain is something that provides me with a lot of comfort. And what I found. And the reason why I'm telling you this is not just because I'm very open about this stuff and I'll talk to anyone about it, but it's because my method of dealing with it by putting myself through pain, by devoting myself completely to others and not helping myself wasn't good enough to deal with the pain of having a newborn, dealing with a 3-year-old, having to look after my wife post-birth, COVID, and my mum dying and my dad not having his lifetime partner who he relied on. And I just couldn't deal with it. And my therapist has helped me just understand that I need to make time for myself, that I need my creative outlet, and that I need to learn to recognize feelings and things. So it's hard. When you ask, how have I dealt with COVID? I've had therapy throughout, but I haven't had a baseline for a long time. So I don't know what good would have looked like. I don't know what bad would have looked like, but I've dealt with it well. I've had great support. You've been amazing. I've got a few friends who've just been there, who I've not really needed, but I've known have been there, and that's as much support as being on a phone or something. And the other side is I'm really enjoying COVID. I love spending time with my family. I love my family. That's my thing. I won't sacrifice anything for my family. So I've really enjoyed that. I've really enjoyed drawing and painting again and running again. And so it's taken mum dying and COVID for me to realise that I need to look after myself. So in a way, it's helped more than anything. So COVID's been a good thing for me.
Wow. It is interesting though, because I'm not going to go, like for like here at all, but it's funny how it can take something really tragic for you to kind of reset. I know for me, when I've had an issue in the past or something's happened in my life, I've actually found it quite retrospectively. It made it quite easy to kind of reframe or add perspective to other things in my life. And I think if we can all take some perspective out of this, even on any level, so it doesn't even have to be as significant or as deep, but even the trivial things. So even just enjoying being able to, speaking to Beth, who you now know at Gasp, she's in Cork, and they've opened pubs, and so her and her girlfriend went to the pub, and it just sounded like it was just the best night ever, just to go out and have a pint. And that's completely trivial versus everything you've just touched on, but it's things like that that now have new perspective. So it's I suppose we have to take as many positives out of it as we can.
I don't think it's trivial. And the reason I don't think it's trivial is when my 3-year-old bumps her head, that's the worst pain she's ever had in her life. And so that is the worst thing that's ever happened. Right. So I've been lucky I've been lucky that I've been through these things, because then when some rubbish happens at work, I can go, do you know what? I've been through deeper stuff than this. And, there's all those, a smooth sailor never made a skilled sailor, all that sort of stuff. I've got a lot of coping mechanisms, and I've got a lot of bad ones. And it's enabled me. It's a leveler, all that stuff. And it lets you go, what is important to me? Is it staying late at work so I can do more work, so I can look better? Is it chasing that promotion? No, it's not. It's my family. That's the most important thing to me.
Amazing. I've got a couple of listener questions for you, ASD.
Yeah.
So asking the general public for their opinion, be it on Brexit or boat names, is notoriously fraught with danger, but we still have two for you. So Sarah asks, brands like Starbucks and Coca-Cola are currently pulling Facebook ads. What do you think of this? Is it any more than some short-term virtue signalling? And what does it mean for digital?
It's a good question, Sarah, and I feel like I'm being led in a direction. I'm partially with you. I think there's a lot of work to be done. Now, my job is not to give a political stance for my clients, which I find very difficult because I've got very strong opinions. I feel for Facebook and Twitter those in particular, because the sheer volume of what they have to deal with makes it impossible, literally impossible, to manage and edit. And you've also got to take the point of view in Facebook's point of view is free speech. Everyone should have free speech. The problem is there's no consequences on Facebook, and well, actually there are consequences, because the way Facebook works, right, is there's two types of content that work. There's content that makes you engage, so that makes you stay on longer, and then there's advertising, which is where they get the money. It's a codependent relationship, and actually the content that makes you stay on, engages you, would be porn, but they don't allow it, and it's political stuff to make you angry, and it's stuff to make you laugh, very emotive content. And so actually, if you've got a strong opinion that makes people emotive, it's more likely to be surfaced, because you're more likely to stay on, because it drives revenue. So they've got a difficult one. Well, difficult in the terms of if you look at it from pure business growth. But I feel also for Facebook in that people are targeting Facebook because it's hashtag stop the hate. But if it's about stop the hate, then you need to examine your press plans. You need to examine every site that you're going on in the open exchange. You're not going to, but I think there's massive value in brands examining where they put their money, because the brands fund the content that drives society. We can't forget that advertising is needed to create everything that we see, everything that we watch, and people forget that. They think that we can block adverts, or we can avoid adverts, and that's what we should be doing. No, we need better adverts, and we need better funding of content, and suddenly this will all go away, because actually a lot of the stupid stuff we see in the press, like we use the press example, there's papers that I'm not politically aligned to, which I think are wrong, morally wrong, but the reason they're doing that is because it sells papers, and it's the clickbait title sells papers, and that's just what we have to deal with. And so advertisers have to take responsibility for that. And so this stop the hate thing, it feels partially a bit of just a PR move. Look how good we are, but we're still spending on places where hate is driven from. And then you've also got to flip it the other way: is you can stop the hate by stopping your budget, but where is your money going, and what are you funding in a positive way? And they need to consider that.
Yeah, it's a complex one. It's a really complex one.
It's really
especially
complex.
As you say,
It's
the whole
not black and white.
ecosystem is set up for that, and it's not just exclusive to Facebook. They just happen to be the bigger player, I suppose.
Yeah. Good question.
Good answer. Question 2 is from Mark, and I know Mark, he's a Spurs fan, and he asks, would you rather see Spurs win the league again or Wales win a major trophy?
Wales win a major trophy.
Oh,
You've got to understand. Wales is a tiny nation. We're the poorest nation in Western Europe, right? We don't have money. England has got more rugby players across all levels than the rest of the countries in the world put together. All the other rugby players in the world put together. England should be winning the Rugby World Cup all the time. Wales are the current Six Nation Grand Slam champions. Admittedly, this year's one got cancelled and we had lost some games. But literally, and that fills me with so much happiness. The only football game I've ever cried at was the Wales 3, Belgium 1 in the Euros, which was 4 years ago today. And Wales just, I don't know whether I've invested more in that identity since I've left, because I'm 33 now. I left when I was 18. I miss it every single day. I miss the people. I miss the land. I miss not being around so many English people. And that is racist, and I will hold my hands up with that. Wales all day long. I love Spurs, but that's assimilated. That's Batman. Bane is Wales for me. I was born in the darkness.
Got it. Nice. The final part of the interview then mate, is our 4 pertinent posers. Number 1 being, what advice would you give to your younger self? Turn up for your McDonald shift earlier.
Yeah. Well, no, not earlier, because then I'd be in an armed robbery. So thanks for that, mate.
You might be a millionaire.
Yeah, that's true. The thing with that, though, is asking you could also say, what do you regret and what would you change? I don't regret much. Because it's maybe who I am today. I wouldn't be here without any of the mistakes I made. I'd maybe make more mistakes, maybe be kinder to people, take more risks. I think use your 20s to make mistakes, learn way more skills, work hard, but don't sacrifice things for people who don't value you, and find the right boss. Finding the right boss is so important, and learn to communicate. If it was very strictly, I'd say read the 48 Laws of Power. I'm a big fan of of giving people a chance, right? People who don't normally get a chance. We had the work experience boy come in. He'd come out of prison the previous Tuesday, and we were talking about books, and he said there was a book they got banned from his prison, The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene, and it's brilliant. It's a bit the Prince Machiavelli, if you look at it as being very manipulative, and it's not like the game. The game feels dirty, but this is more. These are potentially human truths, and this is how people work. And I'll give you an example, actually. I started reading it, and my boss at the time had stopped speaking to me. I was on a bit of a high. I'd won 30 under 30, which you haven't mentioned, but thank you. I'd won the campaign 30 under 30. I was nominated for something else, and I was being sent off to Cannes to do a panel. Like, my ego was stupid. And my boss stopped speaking to me. And I think the second law is never outshine the master. And it was purely because she didn't feel like she could get any value. Like, I was being better than her, and that she wasn't able to help me. So I just needed to reframe that. And as soon as I did, she was back on board, and we got on like house on fire. And it's things like that. It's not being manipulative. It's just learning how to work with people. So read that, be nice to people. That's it.
Cool. Well, that's our number 3, actually, is books. So let's do number 2 first. So if you could banish one thing from the industry, what would it be and why?
Clicks. It would probably be clicks, just because it sounds stupid, but clicks don't indicate anything. Any sort of engagement metric, because there was an amazing stat from 2009 where I think it was 8% of clicks are done by 85% of people, showing that there are clickers, there are engagers, but there are also people who are not engagers, but they're still taking value out of your ad campaign. So, and there's a wider point on vanity metrics, measure versus monitor. I think a lot of things, if you focus on effectiveness, then you do a lot better work, and clicks is the start of that.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, they lack context, don't they, clicks? So, well, number 3 then, any books you would recommend? So we've had one.
Well, The 48 Laws of Power is really good. The Hero with 1,000 Faces by Joseph Campbell is my all-time favourite book. It's an exploration of there's a myth. The myth of the hero is common in every culture, and where that comes from, and it's absolutely fantastic. It's just super interesting. I could talk about books for hours. And that's why I'm going to stop there. I'm reading Mike Tyson's autobiography at the moment, and I rarely read sports biographies, but this is brilliant. It's open. I think he's the most interesting man in the world. Genuinely very good. I've got Rakeem's book, Sweat the Technique, after that. But there's so many books that have changed my life. I've got a link with all the books I've read and the best quotes I've taken out of them, which I can share with you or anyone listening if they want. Yeah,
well, send that over. I'll add it onto this episode. And then people can find it that way. Is Tyson going to make a comeback? Is that true?
I hope not.
No,
I hope not. So my hero is Joe Calzaghe, and because he is, I think, top 10 pound for pound boxer who's ever lived. 10 years, never lost a fight, 10-year world champion across multiple weight classes. I'm a real fighter. And Tyson has a legacy. And the reason I bring up Calzaghe is there were talks of him coming back, and he just said that ridiculous. I've got, what more do I need to do? And Tyson might need the money though.
Yeah, that's the sad truth. The 4th then, ASD, is we always dedicate every episode to someone, and we bestow or hospital pass that honour, depending on your view, to our guest, who has to give their reason why. So would you kindly dedicate this episode?
I've got 2 people. I've got a main person and a sub person. So there's a lot of people talking about diversity in the industry, and it really winds me up because that is as much virtue signalling as the stop the hate stuff, really. But there is someone at MediaCom called Nancy Langthorne, who is the head of diversity, inclusion and future talent, who's the most amazing person in the building. And she has paved the way for so many people who would not have even known about the media industry to get in. And she's focused on the equity part of diversity, where it's given equal opportunity of results. So we find ways to put people up if they need to travel from far away. We help people with travel money if they literally don't have a penny to their name, all of that stuff. And we help them prepare for this job. We help them prepare with CVs. We give them, and we work with charities to find people who drop out of school. We work with schools, and it's all down to Nancy. She's the most amazing person. I love her to bits, and she's normal as well. There's not a lot of normal people in the industry. I love her, and I think she's absolutely brilliant. And I think she doesn't get the praise because she doesn't talk about it. She does it, and I think she's absolutely brilliant. My other one, without sucking up, is you. I think you're absolutely brilliant. I think I'm being serious. Your ability to take an idea, scale it simply, make it beautiful, and make it impactful, whether it's delusions of grandeur, whether it's gasp, whether it's isolated talks, or whether it's this podcast. I have no idea where you stole this idea from, but I think you're a very talented person. I think you're very humble, and I think you don't accept the recognition that you have or deserve. So it's also dedicated to you.
There's a first for everything. Christ, thanks, mate. That's really, that's really kind. That's really kind. Thank you. So this episode is very proudly dedicated to Nancy Lingthorne and slightly embarrassingly dedicated to yours truly. So as a final call to action, everyone listening, if they head over to this episode, we'll share everything discussed in the last hour, all of the book recommendations and the links that ASD is going to ping over, both of ASD's wonderful podcasts. How else can people get more ASD?
I mean, I talk rubbish on at Tweets by ASD. I mean, I get told off by marketing at MediaCom often. So
Are you really?
Yeah. Just because I might say something stupid and it might be related to some client work. So Tweets by ASD. I don't like doing panels or stuff on stages because I don't think people really talk about that much interesting stuff. I shouldn't really say that. But yeah, the show Connected I do with Sue Uniman is really, really, really good. We talk to the most interesting people that we've got a lot of crossover with guests, so you can hear different question set for those guests. We've got Echoes of Glory, which is a podcast I set up 9 years ago before podcasting was cool. Once the 23rd most popular sports podcast in the world.
It's amazing.
It's higher than Stone Cold Steve Austin. So there's that. I've also done a running one where we interviewed elite runners, endurance runners, and I do the podcast for Wackle every year. But I don't know why you would want to. I publish on LinkedIn every now and then, but you can email me if anyone wants to chat about anything. I'm more than happy to help anyone. So andrew.spurrier-Dawes@mediacom.com is where you can find me. Just drop me a note and I'll help anyone.
Perfect. Well, that's all there. Well, thanks for joining us, mate. It's been a real pleasure.
No, thank you for the opportunity. I don't feel worthy if you compared to the list, but I'm super grateful. So thank you.
No, that's nonsense, mate. And finally, thank you to everyone listening. If you've enjoyed this, please do share it and review the pod. We truly value your support. Keep questions and guest requests coming in. To get in touch, it's really easy to find Gasp online. Check out CTA Pod on Instagram or just email hello@calltoaction.co.
Can't get no call to action. I can't get no call to action, but I try and I try